The moment security escorted a black woman out of the luxury car dealership, staff thought they dealt with just another wannabe rich customer. They didn't know they just humiliated the CEO behind the $5 billion fund supporting the dealership network's backbone. What started as racial profiling, within 48 hours triggered a financial collapse they never saw coming. The Los Angeles sun glinted off the mirrored windows of V&R Auto House, casting a glow that made the building's sleek design look like a fortress of exclusivity, as if every inch of its facade whispered, "This place isn't for everyone." Monique Everett crossed the wide sidewalk with steady, graceful steps, dressed in a sharp black business suit. Her tailored blazer stood in stark contrast to the effortless ease of her posture. No flashy jewelry, no loud chatter, just a quiet confidence that spoke louder than words. It was her first time visiting the dealership, yet somehow it already felt like the building itself was trying to push her out. Stepping into the beige marble lobby with its soft lighting, Monique's eyes swept over the cars on display, each one showcased like a masterpiece in a gallery. A hybrid model in the corner caught her attention, but before she could take a closer look, a figure blocked her path. Rick Dalton, a tall, broad-chested white security guard, crossed his arms like he was sealing off a border. Silence was the first barrier, until his voice sliced through the air like a blade. "This kind of place isn't for just anyone, ma'am." She paused, not out of shock at his rudeness, but at the absolute certainty in his tone. It wasn't a question, it was a command. Monique knew this moment was about to become something far bigger than a routine visit. Still, she stayed quiet. There was no point arguing with someone who'd already decided who she was. Rick took a step forward, as if his sheer presence could herd her toward the exit. "You're better off looking somewhere else," he said, his icy politeness barely masking his intent. His eyes scanned her, not for signs of danger, but for reasons to dismiss her. It was as if her skin color erased the quality of her tailored suit, the subtle scent of her perfume, or the fact that she had an appointment. V&R marketed itself as a shrine to excellence. But that morning it felt more like a gatekeeper of segregation. The air conditioning hummed a cold, almost mocking breeze, while in the background, a white salesman offered champagne to a smiling couple. The contrast between that gesture and Rick's approach was glaring, yet invisible to those who'd never had to justify their presence in a place like this. Monique gripped her purse tightly, as if holding on to her very identity. She didn't respond. She didn't need to. Everything she needed was already unfolding. The lobby, with its plush carpets and sophisticated background music, felt frozen in time. Conversations around her carried on as if the thick tension between Monique and Rick didn't exist. No one stepped in. No one seemed surprised. To them, this was just another insignificant moment, maybe even routine. But for Monique, every second was being etched into memory. An invisible camera in her mind recorded it all. The averted glances, the subtle contempt in their movements, the racism that didn't need to be shouted to cut deep. Even without moving past the entrance, she'd already seen through the place. The expensive carpets hid a cheap culture. The exclusive service was, in truth, exclusionary. And Rick Dalton, with his self-appointed role as guardian of order, was just the tip of a much larger iceberg. A sense of déjà vu washed over her. This wasn't the first time she'd been seen as a threat, but it might be the last time they'd get away with it. Her silence was starting to unnerve Rick. He armed himself with rehearsed lines, trying to justify the unjustifiable. But Monique knew that in moments like these, anger wasn't her ally. Strategy was. With a slight tilt of her head, she glanced at the clock on the wall. Her appointment time had just passed, and with that, the quiet plan she'd set in motion began to take shape. Monique reached into her purse and pulled out a folded piece of paper, her printed appointment confirmation, complete with her name, date, and time. But before she could show it, another security guard appeared from the side. Craig Lawson, white, athletic build, with a sneer carved into his face. "We get a lot of people trying to walk in here acting like they belong," he said, smirking. Rick nodded, arms still crossed, as if they'd rehearsed this routine, a duet reserved for when the target was black. Heather Langford, a blonde saleswoman with perfectly straightened hair and a haughty posture, watched the scene from across the showroom. She leaned toward a colleague and muttered, She looks lost, probably doesn't even know what a hybrid engine is. Her voice was low, but not low enough to escape the microphones embedded in the ceiling. Their stifled laughter sliced through Monique's ears. The judgment had been passed, the verdict delivered, guilty of existing. Monique tried again to explain she had an appointment, but Craig cut her off with a quick wave of his hand, like he was swatting away a nuisance. It's a busy day. You can't just walk in and expect to look at cars. The paper in her hand was irrelevant now. Her skin spoke louder than any email confirmation. Suddenly, the simple act of walking through the front door had become a threat to the controlled environment they prided themselves on maintaining. Monique glanced around. White customers glided through the smoked glass aisles, champagne flutes in hand, greeted with warm smiles. No one questioned them. No one stopped them. She took a deep breath, her calm honed by decades of experience. Her silence was now a form of resistance. She knew that responding with hostility would give them exactly what they wanted, an excuse to justify their prejudice as protocol. Heather kept watching from a distance as if waiting for the situation to resolve itself. What she didn't know was that Monique wasn't there by chance. This visit was calculated. Every second was evidence being collected. Every word from Craig or Rick would be dissected later, frame by frame, sound by sound. For now, all Monique did was hold their gaze and refuse to sink to their level. Craig stepped closer, his voice lower but laced with veiled menace. "You need to leave. This isn't a public showroom." The words were framed as if he were protecting a sacred space, but they masked a silent policy of exclusion. Monique's posture didn't waver. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't beg. She simply lowered the appointment confirmation, as if realizing this was never about a scheduling mix-up. It was about a system designed to keep her out. The receptionist looked away, pretending to take another call. The other employees stayed quiet. What was happening wasn't unusual. It was just more blatant than they'd prefer. A system that already decided her presence was a mistake. And still, Monique stood her ground. One step back, motionless, her eyes locked on the two guards. She didn't try to explain herself. She let them dig their own grave with every action. With each passing second, it became clearer that this place never imagined a woman like her could hold power. What no one there knew was that soon, the entire house of cards that was V&R would start to collapse. All because of how they treated someone they failed to see as equal. Rick Dalton moved closer again, this time placing a firm hand on Monique's forearm. The gesture, cloaked in fake courtesy, carried the weight of decades of institutionalized exclusion. "We're just trying to keep things under control, you understand?" he said, his forced smile never reaching his eyes. Craig stood by, silent, as if this were just another day at the office. But Monique didn't react with anger. She cataloged every detail with the precision of someone who'd been through this before and decided it would be the last time. His touch wasn't violent, but it was invasive. And Monique, though composed, felt the symbolic weight of being treated as an intruder for doing nothing at all. Her black business suit, her printed appointment, her calm demeanor, none of it mattered. Here she wasn't a customer. She was a visual disturbance in a space not built to include her. What should have been a routine visit was now a forced march toward the exit of exclusion. Heather Langford watched with a cynical smirk. She leaned toward another employee and whispered, "Another one here to snap a selfie with a luxury car." She didn't bother hiding it. The comment was made with the confidence of someone shielded by a corporate culture that endorsed this behavior. The entire dealership breathed this quiet arrogance. The difference was this time, someone was paying attention. Each step Monique took toward the revolving door was a reinforcement that she didn't belong, not by choice but by design. The polished floor reflected not just the overhead lights, but the institution's biases. The soft click of her low heels on the marble echoed through the showroom, a reminder that something here was deeply wrong. Even as she was dismissed, she walked with the same poise she'd entered with, dignity, even when surrounded by disdain. Outside, the luxury cars parked in the lot gleamed under the California sun. The contrast between their shine and the ugliness of the prejudice Monique had just faced was almost poetic and cruel. No manager stepped in. No apologies were offered. just the complicit silence of a staff trained to weed out those who didn't fit the expected mold. To them, she was just another visitor to brush off. But for her, this was the exact scene she needed to document. Rick released her arm at the door, as if he'd completed a mission. Monique, in turn, simply adjusted her blazer and cast one final glance inside. There was no hatred in her expression. There was something far more dangerous: resolve. It was the kind of look that didn't beg for respect, but demanded justice. And in that moment, V&R's script began to unravel. What seemed like just another mundane act of exclusion was, in fact, being recorded with surgical precision. Monique said nothing. She just observed. But the way she held her phone in her right hand hinted at what was coming. The call she was about to make wouldn't be a plea for help. It would be a trigger. Because what the guards thought was an act of containment was actually the spark for a meticulously planned response. And it would all begin just outside those glass doors. Outside V&R Auto House, Monique stood still for a few seconds. The morning sun touched her face gently, but a silent storm was brewing within her. She took a deep breath, smoothed her hair with a light touch, and without hesitation, unlocked her phone. The screen's reflection in her eyes seemed sharper than any word spoken inside. She dialed a specific number. On the other end, Andrew Kellerman's deep voice answered with immediate respect. Monique? She didn't bother with pleasantries. There was no need. Activate the full withdrawal clause. $5 billion V&R dealership network. Effective immediately. The brief silence that followed was purely procedural. He simply confirmed. Understood. In less than 60 seconds, the order was in motion. What began as a discriminatory encounter was now morphing into the silent implosion of an empire. Monique's eyes stayed fixed on the building as, invisibly, the company's internal systems began flashing red. Silent financial alerts raced across servers in 3 time zones. Risk reports were dispatched to partner banks. Skybridge Equity's capital began retreating like a tide pulling ships out to sea. No one inside the dealership noticed the earthquake she just unleashed, but the ground was already cracking beneath the corporation's feet. Inside, Heather's voice carried through the showroom, cracking a tasteless joke about customers who don't know their place. Monique, now outside, knew exactly her place and the scale of the damage she was about to inflict. That day was part of a confidential mission to investigate recurring discrimination in V&R franchises. She'd chosen to go alone. No entourage, no CEO blazer, just sharp eyes and a precise plan. The exclusion she faced wasn't a fluke. It was the final proof she needed. She recalled the anonymous complaints that had reached Skybridge's board. Erased stories, hushed humiliations, empty promises of change. That's why she didn't send proxies or schedule boardroom meetings. She chose to experience firsthand what so many had described in pain. And there it was. Prejudice dressed up as policy. Racism woven into service standards. A dealership polished on the outside, but rotten at its core. The faint chime of an email notification on Monique's phone signaled the first contracts being frozen. An image of CEO Benjamin Ruth appeared in one of the attachments. A real-time financial impact report was already available. None of it fazed her. She closed her eyes for a moment. It was as if all the pain she'd absorbed in silence was being channeled into one surgical strike. Quiet, precise, irreversible. She slipped her phone back into her purse with no rush. No tears, just the steady resolve of someone who knew that sometimes you don't need to shout to topple structures. You just need to be in the right place, at the right time, with the right decision. And when a Black woman, quietly powerful, is treated as invisible, that's when she becomes most lethal. Inside V&R Auto House, as Monique was silently ushered out, the security cameras captured every detail with precision. Wide-angle lenses recorded Rick gripping her arm, Craig blocking her path, Heather smirking in the background. But those glass eyes saw more than movements. They captured a system operating as it always had, never imagining someone might one day use it as evidence. Nothing that happened there was an exception. It was routine. Ceiling microphones picked up whispered conversations, dripping with subtext and arrogance. One spoken casually by a salesman. She doesn't look like she buys cars. She looks like she cleans the dealership. The comment drew muffled laughs, not shy ones. Every word, every gesture, every complicit silence became, in that moment, undeniable evidence. And Monique knew it. Each second was another brick in a much larger structure. While the staff carried on as if nothing had happened, the dealership's internal servers stored the videos with timestamps and location data. Nothing could be dismissed as a misunderstanding. The footage's clarity showed Monique's impassive face, her hands respectfully clasped, and the guards circling her like she was a threat. No shouting, no resistance. Just a woman being expelled for not matching the ideal client profile. Heather appeared in multiple clips, always in the background but ever present. In one, she shot Monique a look as if seeing through her, not at her. In another, a quick nod seemed to greenlight the guard's approach. Even without words, her gestures spoke volumes, and the cameras, impartial, silent, merciless, recorded it all. Monique didn't need her phone. The company's own infrastructure provided the proof. Outside, as she waited for the withdrawal clause to take effect, the video files were automatically uploaded to central servers. No one suspected that those minutes of unchecked arrogance were being transmitted, processed, and stored for a far greater purpose. The dealership had become a case study stage, and the players inside still thought they controlled the story. V&R sold more than cars. It sold an image of excellence, exclusivity, and sophistication. But none of those words would withstand the truth captured in HD. Because when prejudice is so normalized that it lets itself be filmed without fear, it also signs its own death warrant. And on that sunny Los Angeles morning, what was invisible to many became visible to the world. In the first 24 hours after Monique's call, V&R Auto House faced a silent but catastrophic collapse. The corporate phone lines buzzed nonstop, contracts frozen, proposals rejected, urgent meetings canceled without explanation. Marketing campaigns were halted abruptly by their agencies. Executives, once brimming with confidence, were left scrambling. What was happening? None of them suspected the earthquake had started outside the dealership, at the hands of a woman they didn't bother to hear. Skybridge Equity formalized the complete withdrawal of funds, $5 billion in working capital. With that, every V&R franchise lost immediate access to operating funds, credit lines, and logistical support. Emails flooded in with mass cancellations from suppliers, transporters, insurers. The luxury cars in the showrooms could no longer be delivered. The machinery that kept the empire running ground to a halt. Suddenly, unexpectedly, irreversibly. On the stock market, the parent company's shares plummeted. Rating agencies issued instability warnings. Confidence evaporated. The question rippling through the market was singular. What did V&R hide? No official statement had been released. No explanations reached shareholders. But markets don't need answers. They sense signals. And at that moment, everything pointed to a bomb about to detonate. Managers called each other in a panic. Did you lose the Auto World contract too? The transporter didn't respond? With every call, the sense of collapse grew. Branch leaders, who once boasted about the brand's prestige, now struggled to grasp the chaos unfolding. Inside the dealerships, employees whispered, "Are they going to shut down?" But no one imagined it all started with a customer they dismissed without a second thought. V&R's CEO, Benjamin Ruth, began to feel the situation's gravity. A phone notification alerted him to a 19% stock drop in just 8 hours. An emergency financial report showed an unprecedented deficit. No signs of a cyber attack, no logistical errors, no public image crisis. Yet, it was as if the company were bleeding internally, and no one could find the wound. Outside, Monique's silence was deafening. She didn't appear in public, didn't give interviews, didn't post a single word. But Skybridge's systems ticked like a Swiss watch. Her retaliation wasn't loud. It was strategic. The domino effect she triggered kept spreading, severing partnerships, halting deals, and cooling V&R's name in the market like an invisible, lethal virus. Inside the dealerships, everything looked the same, on the surface. But closer inspection revealed changes. Fewer catalogs, tenser employees, clients leaving early. The empire that thought itself untouchable began to creak. And that sound was just the first hint of what was to come. The next morning, V&R's San Diego headquarters resembled a war zone. Executives paced, phones pressed to ears, spreadsheets sprawled across massive screens, eyes fraught with worry. An emergency meeting was called on the 25th floor. Benjamin Routh stormed in, tie loosened, face taut, trying to project control, but failing to hide his panic. His empire was crumbling, and no one knew why. The CFO, visibly shaken, took the lead. Silently, he connected his laptop to the room's screen. A report appeared. Page 1. Withdrawal clause executed. Skybridge equity. Benjamin's brow furrowed. Who authorized this? The CFO didn't answer immediately. He flipped to the second page, where a name stood out amid financial impact charts. Reading it, Benjamin's breath caught. Monique Everett. What? He blurted, as if he couldn't believe it. His mind raced through recent investor events, board meetings, corporate photos. That woman, it was her? His voice cracked, almost faltering. The room froze. No one dared speak. The irony was brutal. The woman they'd expelled like a glitch in the system was the financial backbone of the company. Without her, V&R's luxury castle was doomed to ruin. Benjamin slumped back in his chair, eyes distant. For the first time, he grasped the meaning of irreversible. Monique wasn't just an investor. She controlled over 60% of the network's working capital. She was the bridge to international financial institutions. The woman they dismissed with arrogance was the one holding up every inch of that building with pillars of cash. And now she'd pulled it all away. Why didn't she say anything? Someone muttered from the back. But the answer was obvious to everyone in the room. Because she wanted to see it for herself. Because she wanted to feel what so many others had reported. And perhaps because she knew she'd be treated in exactly the way that would confirm Skybridge's suspicions. Monique Everett didn't act on impulse. She planned. She waited. She documented. And then she executed with surgical precision. The silence in the boardroom was heavy. Every executive knew this wasn't just an administrative failure. It was a moral and institutional collapse. V&R wasn't paying for a momentary mistake. It was paying for years of a culture that preached inclusion, but practiced exclusion with finesse. And in that moment, they all knew. This wasn't about saving the company anymore. It was too late for that. V&R's compliance team, now under pressure from shareholders and niche media, launched an internal investigation. It wasn't a choice. It was a desperate attempt to stop the bleeding. Confidential reports were reopened, footage reviewed, and the names Rick Dalton, Craig Lawson, and Heather Langford surfaced repeatedly in similar incidents. What was once swept under the rug was now under a spotlight. The company's culture of exclusion had been caught in real time, and there was no denying it. The three employees were summoned for formal statements. Rick and Craig stuck to a rehearsed line. We were just following protocol. Heather, more guarded, claimed she reacted to the customer's behavior and followed team standards. None admitted fault. None mentioned bias, but the videos told a different story. Every frame, every audio clip made it clear they didn't follow protocol. They followed a social instinct shaped by years of normalized discrimination. A behavioral analysis team hired by V&R flagged disturbing patterns. Facial expressions, body language, and vocal tones showed the employees acted with preemptive hostility, unrelated to Monique's actions. Experts labeled it recurring biased conduct. The issue, they said, wasn't just the individuals. It was the training they received, the corporate culture that enabled and nurtured snap judgments. Heather, watching the footage, showed discomfort for the first time, as if finally seeing what she'd refused to acknowledge. But the damage was done. This wasn't about her. It was about an entire system. Internal reports now revealed other similar cases, ignored, downplayed, or settled with formal apologies that never reached the public. V&R had built an ecosystem where racism wasn't an outlier. It was unwritten policy. The board, now cornered, faced the obvious. This wasn't about firing 3 employees. They had to confront a rotten core. Even if they tried to mitigate the damage, the world had already seen what they'd hidden for so long. The investigation didn't just expose the culprits, it exposed the system that shaped them. And that system was now being laid bare for all to see. It was a typical afternoon at Bloomberg Business when an anonymous email arrived with the subject, "You'll want to see this." Attached were short video clips, surgical cuts of the exact moment Monique Everett was escorted out of V&R Auto House. The footage spoke for itself. No filters, no edits, just raw facts in high definition. The journalist who watched sat in silence. By the end of the last clip, he knew this was a global headline. Within 2 hours, the clips were part of an investigative piece. The title took the world by storm: Black Executive Expelled from Luxury Dealership, and $5 billion vanishes in 24 hours. The story went viral on social media. Thousands of comments poured in every minute. People didn't just react with outrage. They began sharing their own experiences in similarly hostile corporate settings. Monique's case was becoming, in real time, a symbol. V&R's PR team tried to contain the fallout with a generic statement: "We are aware of the allegations and are investigating the facts." But it didn't even mention Monique by name. That only fueled more anger. To the public, it was another dodge of accountability. Influencers shared the video with captions like, "This is how they treat the people who keep their empire running." The reputational damage snowballed. Newspapers, radio shows, podcasts, and TV channels dissected the case from every angle. Institutional racism, corporate arrogance, silent exclusion. The name V&R stopped meaning luxury cars. It now stood for an ethical crisis. No ad campaign could prop up the brand now. No press conference could calm the storm brewing in the streets. Meanwhile, Monique stayed silent. No interviews, no responses to reporters. She just watched. The power of her response lay in its lack of noise. And the more she stayed out of the spotlight, the more the world turned to understand who this woman was. The one who, with a single call, had exposed an empire to public scrutiny. The video of Monique's expulsion spread like wildfire. Influencers reposted it with bold messages. "This happens every day, but today it happened to the wrong person." Hashtags like #Justice for Monique and #Boycott V&R shot to the top of trending lists within hours. Everyday people, celebrities, business leaders, and activists joined a spontaneous campaign that grew by the second. The case was no longer personal. It was collective. Major ad agencies publicly cut ties with V&R. "We don't condone racist corporate environments," their statements read. Some luxury car brands demanded their vehicles be pulled from V&R showrooms immediately. A major European auto retail group canceled a merger in progress. The market wasn't reacting to numbers anymore. It was reacting to principles. Former V&R employees found a safe stage on social media to share what was once silenced. Stories flooded in. Black salespeople ignored by clients at managers' encouragement. Job interviews cut short after profile checks. Harassment disguised as appearance feedback. The dealership network's polished image fell apart piece by piece. The public now saw the rot behind the gleaming marble. Civil rights groups organized protests outside V&R's flagship stores. The entrance to a Beverly Hills location was plastered with signs. "They kicked out a black woman. Now we're kicking them out of the market." The noise grew louder. Skybridge Equity maintained institutional silence, but their message was clear. The support that mattered most had been withdrawn, and V&R, without capital or credibility, was starting to wither. Some longtime clients tried defending the company online, but were quickly drowned out by the videos and data. Claims of misinterpretation didn't hold up against the footage. Defending the company culture sounded like a confession. The public had already judged. And in that virtual courtroom, verdicts were merciless. Those who stood by injustice were now seen as complicit. V&R hadn't just lost a customer, it had lost its foundation. The prestige built over decades was demolished by seconds of filmed arrogance. And as they scrambled to contain the storm, one truth spread. This wasn't just about a woman expelled from a dealership. It was about how many stories like hers had never been seen, until now. Cornered by a storm they hadn't foreseen, V&R's board scrambled with emergency measures. First, immediate firings. Rick Dalton and Craig Lawson were officially terminated for conduct inconsistent with company values. The statement was brief, cold, and avoided the real reason. But everyone knew. Heather Langford, once shielded by her sales record, was also let go. The release claimed her actions didn't reflect expected standards. But the videos had already shown a truth no euphemism could hide. The international press covered the firings with skepticism. Too little, too late, read the headlines. Critics noted V&R only acted under pressure. Nothing suggested a genuine commitment to structural change. To many, the terminations felt more like PR than accountability. Monique didn't comment, but her silence spoke louder than any boardroom press conference. As the visible faces fell, business partners kept pulling back. Banks preemptively closed credit lines. Suppliers demanded upfront payments or stopped delivering altogether. Franchises in other states reported sharp drops in foot traffic and mass appointment cancellations. There was no contingency plan for a moral boycott, and that's exactly what V&R faced. An ethical collapse turned operational failure. Global rating agencies downgraded V&R to its lowest score since its founding. Smaller investors rushed to sell their stakes, but the market wasn't buying. The stock hit an all-time low. The image of sophistication, excellence, and exclusivity had become an indelible stain, synonymous with arrogance, racism, and incompetence. What the company built over decades crumbled in days. Inside the dealerships, fear and uncertainty reigned. Salespeople whispered among themselves. Managers dodged in-person meetings. Loyal clients vanished. The sense of an ending hung heavy. V&R tried dousing the fire with PR buckets, but the flames came from the foundation. And when prejudice is the bedrock, no structure lasts long. Skybridge Equity's annual conference packed a New York auditorium. Journalists, investors, executives, and analysts waited eagerly for any word on the case that shook the market. When Monique Everett took the stage, there was no fanfare, no scripted intro, just her, standing in silence, dressed in a minimalist black suit, the same shade as the calm on her face. No forced emotion, just presence. The silence stretched for a few seconds. Then she spoke. When institutions treat dignity as a privilege, they forfeit their claim to our capital. The words, delivered with steady clarity, cut through the room like lightning. No shouting, no direct accusations. Yet each syllable carried the weight of a verdict. Monique didn't name V&R. She didn't need to. The world already knew. She wasn't seeking revenge. What she showed was conviction. Conviction from someone who knew real power is wielded with precision, not noise. In the 5 minutes she stood on stage, Monique spoke of systems, exclusion, and responsibility. This isn't about one store, it's about a system, and we as investors must decide where we lend our names and where we'll no longer allow them to reside. The audience rose in applause, not for show, but because they were witnessing someone who turned outrage into action and action into change. As she left the stage, Monique gave no interviews, but her words were already recorded, transcribed, shared, studied. Business schools began incorporating the V&R case into courses on ethics and corporate power. Her response was brief but definitive. She didn't need to win an argument. She'd already dismantled a system, yet she didn't seem to celebrate because her fight wasn't for vengeance, it was for restructuring. On a gray morning in Pasadena, Monique quietly entered one of V&R's revamped dealerships. The store now boasted diversity posters, inclusion slogans, and an overly cheerful new manager. But Monique wasn't there for retribution or to make a scene. She was just observing. She moved through the glass aisles like someone strolling through a former battlefield now covered in flowers. Her presence alone was an answer. At the entrance, Craig Lawson, now demoted to a temporary, outsourced security gig, recognized her the moment she walked in. His body stiffened. His eyes tried to avoid hers but couldn't. Monique paused for a second. She said nothing, just looked at him with steady resolve. It wasn't a look of anger or threat, but it carried a weight no uniform or badge could withstand. Craig didn't try to explain himself. He didn't apologize. The silence between them said more than any words could. Monique moved on with light steps, taking in the new faces on the team, the emptier showroom, the nervous smile of the new saleswoman. She knew the place had changed, not out of conviction, but survival. And forced change, however necessary, always leaves a bitter taste. As she left, Monique didn't look back, but Craig stood frozen, his face that of someone who, for the first time understood. The woman he once treated as invisible was now unavoidable. She didn't need to prove anything anymore, because in that brief encounter, without words, without an audience, without headlines, justice had already been served. The V&R Auto House case crossed borders, debates, and classrooms. It was no longer just a story about racism in a dealership. It was a global warning about what happens when prejudice becomes silent policy. International funds began reassessing portfolios based on real social criteria. Internal audits swept through companies that once claimed diversity in press releases alone. The market learned it's not just about numbers, it's about values. Monique Everett didn't chase titles or applause. She continued leading Skybridge with her usual discretion. But her name now carried new weight among CEOs and boards, the weight of someone who redrew the boundaries of influence. Not through shouting, but through strategy. She became a symbol for a new generation of leaders, quiet, composed, and absolutely lethal when underestimated. Her action wasn't an outlier. It was a precedent. Newspapers and universities treated V&R's collapse as a milestone. Documentaries were made, books were written, Black professionals worldwide began sharing their stories with newfound boldness, knowing someone, somewhere, had the courage to walk in, observe, and act. And in doing so, prove that changing systems doesn't require shouting. It requires precision, dignity, and timing. In the end, what Monique did in that dealership was simple. She walked in, she listened, she waited, and when she was certain the system didn't see her as equal, she dismantled it entirely. Because true power isn't in yelling to be heard. It's in speaking when no one expects, and making the world listen anyway. Do you think they would have done the same if she were white? How would you have reacted in her place? It's super important that you drop your comment. You won't believe the twist that went down in this other story popping up on your screen. Check it out right now.